watch our video, we'll upload that as well. So thank you so much for joining. This is DEH Applied Linguistics and TESOL lecture series, and welcome to you all. Today I'm really glad to have two of the very senior academics, Associate Professor Dr. Vijaylal Boshu from Dhaka University, Department of English, and also Professor Mostafizar Rahman, Department of English, Khulna University. I'm also
Bashir, we can't hear you. Can everyone hear Bashir, or we're breaking up?
Sir, I think Boshu sir got disconnected.
Okay.
Oh, I think he's back.
So the beauty of technology, I suppose. So, okay.
Right.
I think I jinxed it last time, by moving from that room to my study.
You're like good luck to us. So
sorry for the inconvenience.
all right.
Okay, all right. I'm really honored, and we are also glad that we have our honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Shamsad Murtuza sir here, and also department head, our honorable department head of DEH, Associate Professor Arifa Gani Rahman with us. I would like to request Professor Shamsad Murtuza sir to formally comments this lecture series, second episode of this lecture series. Sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, Moshir. And I'm so glad that you could join in. So it's never easy after Iftar. So thank you for your generous, for your generosity, especially with regards to time. And this is a very important topic. And this is the second lecture series that the Department of English and Humanities is organizing. So thanks to Moshir, he initiated this series of lectures on applied linguistics. And we are really honored and humbled by the presence of two scholars, Professor Mostafizar Rahman, I just got to know him. And I was just looking at his CV, very impressive CV, he did his PhD from NUS. And Bijoy is like my younger brother, so I'm a big fan of Bijoy, so he actually takes care of me at DU. So it's good to see Bijoy, and Bijoy went to UCL, King's College. And the good thing about Bijoy is that he keeps a very low profile, but he's a solid scholar, and I can vouch for it. So I'm really proud to be his colleague, and I really look forward to learning from this talk today. And I'm sure this will open up a discourse in which we can all participate. I understand that we're going to talk about so what is holding us back, and in terms of the textbook, unfortunately or fortunately, I was a part of it. I was a member of that a board of writers, or panel of writers rather, and it was hastily done. So I'm sure there were many procedural mistakes that the panelists today will point out, and I'll try to add my 2 pennies as we go along. So with that, Bijoy and Professor Mustafiz, welcome to ULab, and welcome to this virtual session, and thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I want to introduce our first speaker for today's session, Associate Professor Dr. Vijaylal Boshu. Associate Professor Dr. Vijaylal Boshu is an Associate Professor at the Department of English, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. He has a PhD in Curriculum and Pedagogy from King's College London, and an MA in TESOL from UCL, Institute of Education. He has co-authored Endeavour, an introductory language course book in 2014, and published articles in journals including TESOL, electronic journals, Journal of TESOL, Asia TEFL, and International Journal of Applied Linguistics, Indonesian Journal of Applied Linguistics. His research interests include TESOL curriculum and pedagogy, teacher education, pragmatics, and discourse studies. I would like to welcome Associate Professor Dr. Vijaylal Boshu, sir, to present his lecture. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Bashir. And good evening, everyone. And thank you, ULab, for having me. I'm a big fan of all the activities that you have been doing in the past few years since I started following you. I actually worked at ULab for some time, not as a full-timer, as an adjunct faculty.
Time to
That was
resume.
probably
Bijoy, time to resume.
okay. Yeah. So it's good to be back with you in some capacity. Right. So I think I have to share my slides. I've got a few slides. Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Great. So the title of my talk is "What Holds Curriculum Reform Back?" So we have been talking about curriculum reform in Bangladesh for quite some time. We had our first major overhaul in 1997 when communicative curriculum was introduced. And then there was a revision of that curriculum in 2012. Now, I have always been interested in curriculum in language learning and language teaching. I learned English, in the countryside when I was at school. And when I came to university, I struggled initially. One question I had in my mind when I was a student was, how could I learn the English language? What was required? Um, I kept asking this question to myself all the time. I tried to find an answer to that. And when I opted for ELT for my master's at Dhaka University, this question was replaced by a different question, a related but different question. What is it that teachers can do to improve teaching and learning? What is the best way to teach English? How can we ensure that students learn this language well? How can we ensure that students are able to use the English language effectively in professional life? So I kept asking this question. And when it was time to choose a topic for my PhD, um, I chose teacher cognition because I thought teacher cognition was something that deserved attention. I felt that teachers were not always well informed about the curriculum. The aims and objectives were not communicated to them, and maybe the context in which they worked was not cooperating with what they wanted to do. So that was my initial idea for my PhD. But as I started writing my thesis in 2015, my understanding of English language teaching, curriculum development process, um, curriculum implementation, teacher education started undergoing major change. Now, this talk is based on some of the insights that I derived during my PhD research. I'm not going to present to you what I found in my PhD research. That's a different talk. In this talk, um, for this talk, sorry, I have selected a few points that I think deserve attention. I think someone is in the waiting room. Okay, right. So the should I stop for the azan or should I continue?
Um,
Uh, we don't have any
I
issue, like if you don't have
we
any.
don't have an issue. If you want to continue, you
Right.
can, sir.
All right. So the aim of my talk now. The aim of my talk is not to argue that the 2012 curriculum reform was a total failure or it was a grand success. That is not the intention. The aim of my talk is not to argue that the reform curriculum is better than the previous curriculum. The aim of my talk is to highlight certain factors that constrain the 2012 curriculum reform initiative in the context of Bangladesh. Now, Shamsud Murtaza Bhai has already mentioned that he was a part of the curriculum in some capacity as an author, as far as I know. So I think he'll relate to my talk. I hope that he'll be able to relate to that talk. Now, the aim of my talk is also to initiate a discussion to find strategies for more successful reform. Right. I'll skip a little bit here. Now, when we talk about curriculum development, curriculum implementation, curriculum enactment, we often uh, move to, or let's say, look up to Fulan and his books. He is one of the major authors on curriculum reform and change management. So he said that in curriculum development, there are three main stages. You have initiation stage, then you have implementation stage, and then you also have institutionalization stage. So any change initiative or reform um, have to be implemented. Change initiatives um, are are taken by the ministry. Often, foreign donors, international agencies are involved. So change is initiated, and then there are a number of things that have to be done as part of the initiative. A curriculum framework has to be developed. Then textbooks have to be developed, teachers' guides are written, and then teachers are given training, and then it is expected that teachers will be able to implement uh, the new curriculum or the change proposals or recommendations. And it is also hoped that the changes that have been attempted will be institutionalized after some time. When teachers get used to the changes, when they are able to implement the changes will be institutionalized, and the changes will not be fleeting, because it is often reported that changes are initiated and also implemented, but after some time, when funding runs out, teachers go back to uh, old ways of teaching, students go back to their way of learning, and the change initiatives that are taken are not uh, sustainable when funding runs out and when teachers do not take ownership of the change. Um, so a few things that our curriculum, the national curriculum in Bangladesh, attempted to do. One was active learning. It was stated in the curriculum framework that um, teachers and learners will be involved in active learning. Teachers will have to facilitate active learning. Students will engage in different activities, and they will learn the language through participation in different activities. It also promoted interactive approaches to teaching. So it was said in the framework curriculum document that teachers should ask questions and give feedback. Teachers should ask probing questions. When students give a response, students should ask probing questions. to engage them in the discussion. They should give opportunities to engage students in discussion and debate. It was also mentioned that literature should be used for enjoyment as well as learning. So literature um, promotes enjoyment, facilitates enjoyment. So students will have an enjoyable experience if literature is used, and literature will also help them learn the language. About assessment, testing and assessment, it was said that teachers should assess students in class, and it should be continuous, not summative all the time. Something that is not that is not happening in our country. Um, the medium of instruction, there is a mention of the medium of instruction. It is said that English should be used as much as possible, but mother tongue may be used to facilitate understanding. And then it also mentions teaching approaches. It doesn't really mention any particular method that should be used. So it doesn't recommend any single method as such. It says that any method may be used, or a combination of methods may be used, whatever teachers want. If they feel that certain activities work for them, traditional or innovative, if the activities work for them, then they should use those activities. Now, the curriculum document also mentions that the classroom atmosphere should be congenial. Students should not be afraid to ask questions, and students should not be abused. There should not be any corporal punishment, something like that. And every student has the capability to learn. So teachers should keep that in mind and encourage students to learn. They should not use abusive language, and no corporal punishment. Now, about grammar teaching, it is mentioned that grammar should be contextualized and not taught in isolation. So these are some of the recommendations made in the curriculum guideline. And it also mentioned that they conducted a needs analysis initially with stakeholders. uh, they consulted teachers, students, guardians, educationists, um, uh, and scholars. So they developed a curriculum framework based on their finding of uh, the needs analysis that they had conducted. And they also um, after needs analysis, when they prepared the curriculum framework, um, they mention in the document itself how the curriculum document was prepared. And this hope is expressed in the curriculum document that the textbooks should be written in line with the recommendations, and classroom teaching will also happen in line with the recommendation. So there was a lot of optimism in the curriculum document. Right. So moving on, yes. So as I started, reading the curriculum document, I also came across certain, let's say, contradictions and vague expressions in the document. Now, it is understood in curriculum research that the change message, whenever change is attempted, the change message has to be clear. If the message is unclear, then the change implementation uh, processes will be affected. So I just want to show you a few sentences in the curriculum document that reflect how vague messages are at times. Um, so this one occurs on page 35. Teachers' language skill development should be given priority over training them in teaching methodology or any other areas. Now, there is no explanation for that. Now, normally you think that teaching methodology is also important. Teachers, of course, should have language skills, advanced language skills themselves, because otherwise they will not be able to teach well. Because if they themselves are not, if they themselves are not proficient users, then students will not learn much from them. Then test items must be developed by question setters. Now, test items must be developed by question setter. What does it mean? Question setters will set test items. What is new about that, or what is it that they are trying to convey here? So I thought that the change message, or the recommendations that are the recommendations that are given in the curriculum document are not always phrased in clear English. Moving on. Now, one problem we have in curriculum reform is that we do not have a horses for courses policy. We have this one size fits all policy. Now, Bangladesh is one of those countries where education system is centralized. So all the textbooks are prepared by the National Curriculum and Textbook Board. Now, I'm talking about the mainstream Bengali medium schools. The problem is that the same books are used in, let's say, top schools of the country, and the books are also used in, let's say, disadvantaged areas, in schools where facilities are scarce, and uh, you know subject teachers are not available. So let us look at this quote from a teacher who taught at a school in Dhaka when I interviewed her. I think she's still there. So these books may be good enough for rural schools, but these are too easy for our students. Now, this is what she said, and she was not talking about the HSC textbook. She was talking about the lower secondary and secondary textbooks. She was totally against having one particular textbook for all schools. She believed that teachers and schools should have the provision of their own textbooks, and you know teachers should be able to use any book that they want to use, depending on the level of their students, depending on the context. Now, what is interesting is that um, a teacher from a suburban area um, stated that um, the book was difficult for his students. So the same book, which is found to be rather easy and demotivating for the students, is perceived as too difficult for another school. And I feel that this holds curriculum reform back. This one size fits all policy in Bangladesh that we practice here in Bangladesh, this doesn't help anyone. So this is one of the factors that, in my understanding, holds curriculum reform back. Now, I also found out when I was interviewing the teachers. Now, I think I should have made it very clear at the outset. For this talk, I'm drawing on my fieldwork experience in 2017 and 2018. I interviewed the teachers, I observed lessons, and I interviewed other stakeholders, NCTB officials, parents, students, and this talk is based on uh, some of those interviews and observations. Now, I found that um, student engagement in class, the schools that I observed urban schools, rural schools, suburban schools. I found that student engagement was really limited. It was mostly traditional, in the sense that teachers dominated classroom discourse. Students, I asked questions uh, occasionally, but it was teacher led most of the time, and students were, let's say, passive listeners in most cases. Occasionally, the teachers asked questions when students responded or replied. Um, so, um, but having said that, I have to also make it clear that the picture was not uniform. In different schools with different teachers, you will see different pictures. It's not uniform. Not every teacher, will follow the same practice, and there was uh, you know school to school variation. So there was variation based on um, the teacher's proficiency level, teacher's background, and the location of the school. So I'm not suggesting that the same practice was found everywhere, but generally speaking, um, active learning was not found. Uh, so I interviewed teachers. What I asked one teacher. The curriculum document says that active learning should be promoted. What do you think about this? Do you agree with that? And this is what the teacher said. So he said that if students do not come to school, if they do not pay attention to the class, there is no active learning. Active learning requires paying attention. Now, this interview was in Bangla. I translated into English. Now, it is clear that the teacher did not have a clear understanding of active learning. He thought that coming to the class, paying attention was active learning. It was not, um, uh, you know, clear to him how teachers should promote active learning. But another teacher from the same school, he seemed to know what active learning involved. He had more training and more experience. He said that I know group work is important. Last year, my students did a debate in class, but it does not happen very often. We end up teaching according to the test. So he seemed to know that active learning involved student engagement, discussion and debate, project work, and all that. But he is not able to do that because the tests did not require active learning. Now, moving on to literature, the curriculum document, like I said before, promotes the use of literary texts. Um, but I found out that literary texts are rarely used in the schools. So out of sight, out of mind. It reminds me of this saying. So I modified it a little bit: out of exam, out of class. So students know that these texts are not important for exams. They do not want to study this. Now, this is what a teacher said. Um I asked him, "Do you use the poems and the short stories that are, provided in the textbook?" And this is what he said: "If the texts are not important for the exam, then why waste time teaching them?" Now, a teacher from an urban school, she had a different idea. She actually taught a poem in one of the classes that I observed, and she had this rationale for teaching the poem. So she said, "I teach the poems. Literature is very helpful for language learning. We need to have a component for assessing poems and short stories. Otherwise, students and teachers will be reluctant to read this." So she had a background in English literature. She studied at a university, and it was probably because she had a background that she was able to teach, and she wanted to teach literature in the language classroom. Um, right. Now, if we look back at the um curriculum, when the initiative was taken to reform the existing curriculum, the textbooks were published in 2013. I mean, I think the first one or first couple of textbooks were published in 2013. And then every year in 2014, 15, 16, reprints came out. Probably because there were errors in the initial print copies. and also because they do not have to publish all the books at a time. But the first few books came out in 2013, following the publication of the National Curriculum Framework in 2012. But the teachers' guides were not published. So when I was doing my field work, and I wanted to ask teachers about the teacher's guide or about the curriculum framework, I realized that they had not received the teacher's guide. So I had a copy. I had collected a copy from NCTB. Uh, the teacher's guides had just been published, probably a month before I went for field work, and the teachers had no copies of the teacher's guide. Now the problem is that when the new textbooks are published and given to the teachers, either teacher training has to be given or teacher guides have to be given to the teachers so that teachers can go through the guides and find out about the aims and objectives of the curriculum, what they should be doing, how they should teach, how they should assess. But unfortunately, the teachers' guides were not published. So I went to NCTB and I interviewed an official there. I asked why the teachers' guides were not published in 2013 or 14, immediately after the textbooks, or with the textbooks. When textbooks were published, guides should have been published at the same time. But it was not the case. Now, he said that when the curriculum reform initiative was taken, um, there was a partnership between the government and international agencies and donors. Now, there was some initial funding and the textbooks were written, but then the funding ran out. And when the funding ran out, they were not able to carry on with the work. So, the process of publishing the teachers' guides were stopped. Uh, so the teachers' guides were finally published in 2017. Now, probably 4 years after the textbooks had been published. So this really held the innovation back, because teachers have very little understanding of what was active learning, what teachers were supposed to do to implement formative assessment or continuous assessment. And um, about the textbooks, when the textbooks were written, um, one author uh, stated during an interview that there was no time for trialing. That the textbook authors were given very little time to publish the textbook, and Shamshad Murtaza was talking about that. He was talking about the process. I don't know how much time he had when he was writing the textbook for the HSC level. But this is what an author said, that they were given tight deadlines to produce the book. Now, one of the book was written in less than 2 months. So can you imagine that? In less than 2 months. So you can't expect very good work even when the authors are qualified and they are sincere. Everybody is busy. They have full-time jobs, and um, they have other things to do. And if they're given 2 months to produce a textbook, you can't expect much. And of course, to ensure quality, we expect that the textbooks should be trialed, and teachers should use them first and then give feedback, and then based on classroom experience, the initial manuscript should be revised. Now, that did not always happen. Now, when I interviewed a senior official of the NCTB, he said that we follow the process. We conducted a needs analysis. We carried out an extensive research evaluating the existing curriculum, and based on our findings, we prepared a curriculum framework, and then we prepared the textbooks, and then we gave training to the teachers. We published teachers' guides. Yes, the TG took some time, but we provided training to the teachers. So he was defending the whole process. But if you look at it carefully, there was actually very little time for the authors of the textbook to produce the textbooks, and it is because the NCTB had taken a lot of time, and not just the NCTB, the Ministry of Education, and everybody involved in the process of, let's say, initiating the curriculum and developing the curriculum. They had taken a lot of time initially. They had invited foreign experts, and they did their research. So it took a couple of years, and then they realized that the time was running out, and they had to hurry. And so the authors of the textbooks were pushed to produce the textbooks in quick time. So the process of, the time management thing, the distribution of time, how you plan for it, the entire schedule, that was flawed in my understanding. Now, when I looked at the lessons, when I looked at the lesson transcript, I observed the lessons and I prepared lesson transcripts. And when I went through the lesson transcripts and talked to the teachers, I found out that some of the objectives of the curriculum were not really, uh, let's say, fulfilled or achieved. Like one aim is to develop critical thinking, and some open questions are included in the textbooks. So the answer is not given in the text. So students were supposed to connect the dots. They were supposed to make inferences and find the answers. And I found out that in quite a few cases, teachers actually skipped the open questions. And then I asked after the class, like, why you asked these questions to the students, but you skipped this particular question? Why did you do that? So the teacher said, I thought the students would not be able to answer that. So, and then I said, well, why not? If they, and even when they cannot answer this question, at least this question will give them an opportunity to think. And then he agreed with me, and he looked puzzled. So I realized that teachers actually had low expectations, particularly in rural schools. Teachers have low expectations. They are happy when students are able to produce some, let's say, memorized answers. So literature is either not taught or not given much importance. And then in case of writing, I also found that teachers gave sample answers. They wrote sample answers in the whiteboard, and students were supposed to note down and memorize those answers. So it was surprising for me, because I thought teachers would ask students to write, and writing would involve writing, actual writing. So planning and writing, preparing a draft, and the teachers would give some feedback. But that didn't always happen. Having said that, it was not the case with all teachers and in all schools, but in quite a few schools that I visited, this was the case. Teachers gave set answers. Students were supposed to learn them by heart. Right. So I'm almost there. I'll be able to finish in a couple of minutes. So to sum it all up, I feel that a number of things conspire to hold things back in the Bangladeshi context. The first thing is one size fits all. We have this centralized system where there is no provision for teachers to design their materials or schools to choose their own books. One textbook is prepared for all schools, and it certainly doesn't fit all. So we do not have a horses for courses policy. We probably need something like that. I understand that there are pros and cons. Now, leaving the decision with the school has its challenges. Of course, there will be questions. Some schools might not be able to choose good books or quality books. So there might be issues, even when so issues might arise when, if full freedom is given to the schools. But right now, this one size fits all policy is not helping the schools. Now, piecemeal development of the curriculum, I've talked about the process of curriculum development, that how the policymakers and let's say high officials of the Ministry of Education take up a lot of time initially to for research, needs analysis, research, and framework development, and how they give very little time to the teachers, to the authors to write the textbooks, and there is very little time for trialing. So even though trialing is there, if you interview them, they will say we had 100 schools for trialing purposes, and these were our settings where we uh, you know try to find out if the materials were appropriate, if the materials are suitable. But actually, the feedback from the teachers during trialing, that was not given back to the authors, because there was no time to incorporate the suggestions from the teachers. So teachers and students had very little role in curriculum development. They were at the on the receiving end of the curriculum. They were not stakeholder in the true sense of the term, and so their voices and their preferences uh, find very little uh, you know uh, expression in the curriculum. And this when curriculum development is initiated, usually it is said that teachers are not able to implement the curriculum, students are reluctant, parents are too much focused on students, their children's grades and exam results, and because of that the curriculum was not possible to implement the curriculum. uh, so often they take the shortcut. So when the result is not satisfactory, or when there is criticism, then they take the shortcut and go for another revision. Okay, let us change the textbooks. Let us change this curriculum. This is not working, so let us go for another. But what they do not do is, they do not take the initiative to change the structure and the process of curriculum development. So the structure remains the same: large classrooms, exam-oriented education, lack of alignment between what is recommended in the curriculum document and what is tested. All these issues remain. So instead of addressing the real issues, they opt for the shortcut. They find a sacrificial lamb, in my opinion, and that is, the existing curriculum. The existing curriculum was badly done, so a new group of individuals take over, and they say that the previous one was not working. There are problems, so let us go for a new one. So the textbooks undergo change, and the new textbooks replace the old ones, but the structure remains the same, and the process of curriculum development, that needs an overhaul, but that is not really given much attention to. Um, so the time is not properly distributed, in the sense that too much time is taken initially, and there is very little time for writing the textbooks and trialing the textbooks. And funding is another issue. The teachers, the authors, the educators, they are not given much remuneration, so they work for reputation, or for their out of their commitment for the country, for the education of the children. But there is very little infrastructural support. So these factors are, in my understanding, these are some of the factors that hold educational reform back. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your thought-provoking presentation lecture. Some of the things I think our audience, they have questions, so we'll hold it back. There will be a brief question answer session at the end of the lecture, so then they can ask. And also we have Professor Shamsud Murtuza with us, and yeah, so there will be questions and or comments. at the end of the lecture. All right, now I'm going to introduce our next presenter, Professor ARM Mostafizar Rahman. Professor ARM Mostafizar Rahman is a professor in English at Khulna University, Khulna. He obtained his MA in ELT degree from Aligarh University, India, and a second MA in Applied Linguistics from University of Putra, Malaysia in 2001 and 2008 respectively, before earning his PhD in English Language and Linguistics from the National University of Singapore in 2020. His fields of research interest include different areas of ELT, applied linguistics, sociolinguistics, critical discourse analysis, and research methodology. I would like to welcome Professor Mostafizar Rahman. Sir?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me share my screen first.
Sorry, are you having problem with your share screening? Like, so.
Can you see it?
Not yet, sir.
Let me do it. Maybe I'm encountered with some technical difficulties.
Sir, if you want to email your presentation, I can open it from my laptop and share it.
Okay. I think
Yes, sir.
that will be better. Let me do it.
All right, sir. Yeah.
Mr. Boshu, can you check?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just a moment.
So did you get it, Monsieur?
Sir, it's loading. Yes, sir. I've received. Just a moment, sir. I mean,
Okay, sure.
Can we see the slides?
Yes, we can.
No.
All right.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
So
Okay.
দেখা যাচ্ছে? জি, জি, all right.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Just a moment. Just a moment, sir.
Shall I start?
Sir, আমি full slide
Please do.
একটু দেখি। হ্যাঁ। Sir, আপনি start করেন। You please start.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Boshu, for introducing me to the audience. Actually, I loved listening to Dr. Bijoy on a very interesting topic regarding curriculum reform. This is one of my favorite areas of studies as well. Hope I'll know a lot about curriculum developments, curriculum reforms shortly from Dr. Bijoy in future. I'm honored to be introduced with Professor Mostafizar today. I heard about him from two of my friends, Dr. Kamrul and Dr. Saidur from IML, though I got an opportunity to be introduced with him just today, this evening. I must thank ULEV and especially Moshur for giving me an opportunity this evening to share my views on a topic entitled Language Choice in Globalization and Superdiversity. It's an area in sociolinguistics. I'll try to connect the main concept with some policy studies like language and education policy, then language acquisition policy, and what I say, medium of instruction policy. Let me start with an orientation to the key words in the title.
Must you change slide?
Sir,
Yeah, can you please go to the second slide?
okay. Is this the super diversity number 3?
The second slide.
Second slide. All right, sir. This is the second one.
No, this is the first slide.
Okay. All right. This one, sir.
Moshir, you need to enable the content.
It doesn't change the slide.
Enable the content.
Enable the content from.
You see the yellow
where?
line? Can you see
Yellow
the
line?
yellow line? Yeah. The security warning.
Security warning, top bar jeta.
Just next to security warning, there is enable content.
Sir, I'm not getting it, sir.
একটা ব্যান্ডের মতো আছে না? ফন্ট বিগ ফন্টে লেখার নিচে।
Slide A, sir, in the PowerPoint slide.
এটা কি বলবো, security
It's
warning
above the slides. It's above the
this.
slide. Yeah, it's a little yellow bar.
So I'm not getting it, sir.
Just above the
Can you
title.
turn it off and turn it back on?
Okay, all
Turn
right.
off your screen sharing and turn it back on.
Okay. Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
But it's a third slide. I need to go back to the second slide.
Second slide. All right, sir. This one?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes. Thank you very much. So the key notions in the title are language choice, globalization, and superdiversity. Let me introduce you with these 3 key notions. The first one is language choice. It refers to choosing languages or varieties of languages like dialect or sociolect, as well as linguistic features like vocabulary, accent, etc. for our communication. While we communicate or while we use language, uh, if we are monolingual, say in an ideal situation, we choose only one language that we know. But if we are bilingual or multilingual of a varying degree, we need to choose features from different linguistic sources. How do you do it? And why do we do it? What are the major causes behind this? That we will try to be addressed with the notion of globalization and superdiversity. Globalization, a term that we all know because we are in the era of globalization, or we can say we are crossing the era of globalization. And in linguistics, and particularly sociolinguistics, it is a very important issue because sociolinguistics deals with the use of language in society. So if globalization brings about some changes in the society, social norms and values, obviously it has an impact on the use of language. And what are the impacts that we will know shortly in the later slides. The term, though, came into fashion since World War II, but the notion is found to be existed long before the coinage of the term. It refers to interconnectedness between different parts of the world for various reasons, like the flow of capitalism, advancement of science and technology, ubiquity of mass media, availability of affordable travel, migration, and so on. Mushi, can you go to the next slide?
Yes, sir.
And superdiversity, as we'll know that huge waves of global migration across the world have caused massive demographic, social, cultural, economic, and political changes in the configurations of urban landscapes across the world. Since people are moving from one country to another, they're bringing their culture, their language, their tradition with them. And such kind of mixing have brought about changes, extraordinary changes and complexities in economic, social, cultural, ethnic, and linguistic dynamics in the system. The place where they come, the place where they live in. Besides migration, another important factor, digitalization, is also responsible for bringing diversity into the urban landscape. Because of digitalization, we have seen that people from urban areas, they are now living in the time where they use different technological equipments, communication technologies like mobile phone. They share information on different medias like social media, and uh, this has brought about a change in the lifestyle of the urban people. This has brought about a diversity in the urban landscapes. If we see at the urban areas, we find that people from different localities have come to the urban areas. They have been living in the cities for different purposes. And since it creates a kind of mixing, a kind of blending, it intensifies that diversity of the urban landscape. Can you go to the next slide? Yes. And these have helped to form an interconnectedness in the cyberspace. We have created virtual community. The diversification is not found only in the physical landscape, but also in the virtual community. We are now connected with people from different cultural, social, and regional backgrounds. We have friends from different countries. We have colleagues from different countries. We meet them on different platforms like chat rooms, online classrooms, mass online gaming, etc. And these senses have diversified the diversity. That means a city is already a kind of diversity, means diversified people live together in the city. But these features, especially globalization, migration, then virtual communities, these features have diversified the diversity. But this diversification is not equal in every city. For example, if we consider the diversification of the city of London, and if we compare it with Dhaka, the diversification is not the same. It has different degrees. So if we see the next slide, we can see a picture of diversification in the city of London. It's an image where we see different codes from different languages. And it shows that how intensively London city is diversified, or or how intensively the diversification has been taken place. But if we look at the next slide, it's not from the London, it's not from the Dhaka, it's from a very district level place of Bangladesh. It's in Joshua. If we look at the signage, it shows that the signage includes letters from different languages. So it indicates that diversification is not only available in the urban areas or urban places. It has been started in semi-urban areas as well. Like this signage indicates that a place in Joshua is linguistically diversified to some extent. Let's go to the next slide. But why are you concerned about all these notions? Language choice, globalization, and super diversity. Why are we concerned about all this? Because globalization and super diversity. Super diversity is a notion which is considered to be the consequence of globalization. But both these notions, globalization and super diversity, they have brought about changes in the urban social lives. People in the urban areas are now seen reorganized in relation to multi-layered, competing or complementary norms. The social norms, the cultural norms, or norms related to language use have been restructured, reorganized. Dramatic transformations or such dramatic transformations have been brought about in some of the basic notions such as language, community, identity, citizenship, and ideology. We know what language is, we know what a linguistic community is, we know what is linguistic identity, or we know what are language ideologies. But with globalization and super diversity, these notions have been modified or redefined or restructured, reconfigured. And we have customized our ideas about this. In this sociolinguistic transformation, people now talk differently, and different languages and scripts appear in the neighborhood. It means that though we live in, say, in Dhaka, but uh, different linguistic signs appear in our neighbors, as one we saw with Aki Jute Mill. It indicates that we are diversified, or we have been diversified due to the socio-linguistic transformation because of globalization and super diversity. The next slide. What was our ideas about language, linguistic communities, or language practices? With structuralism, people perceive language as an autonomous, discrete, or self-defining entity, a boundary system of systems, and a closed structure that excludes features of other linguistic systems. It means that every language is unique, it has its own features, and people should use it following its own norms. No one can violate its own norms. And so, any fusion of elements, any blending of elements from multiple sources is prohibited because it is considered a kind of deviation of norms. That is the views of structuralism, that every language is unique. It cannot be mixed up with other linguistic features. Say, in case of Bangla, it is one of the world's languages. It has its own system of vocabulary, syntax, and etc. If someone wants to use Bangla, he or she should use Bangla as it is. No one can mix up or mix elements from other sources with Bangla. That is the views expressed and promoted by structuralism. But what happens with globalization and super diversity? We can see it in the next slide. In post-structuralism, scholars like Rahman realizes the impossibility of identifying a clear line of boundary between languages, such as German and Dutch, based on the linguistic criteria. Even some scholars find it difficult to distinguish between dialects. Why? Because if we look at the linguistic practices of urban people, they use language in such a way we can hardly identify the sources of different linguistic features. And thus, Hiller understands that speakers draw on linguistic resources which are organized in ways that make sense under specific social circumstances. circumstances. It means that whenever we choose linguistic features to communicate with our fellow beings, we hardly understand that this particular feature I am taking from Bangla, that feature is taken from English, or another one is taken from, say, Hindi. What we see that it comes automatically from our linguistic repertoire, and it indicates that our linguistic repertoire is something complex, which includes features of multilingual resources, or which include features from different languages. In the next slide, we feel that super diverse environments, both online and offline. Online, what we got to know about the virtual communities, and offline, while we talk in person, face to face, people appear to take any linguistic and communicative resources available to them and blend them into hugely complex linguistic and semiotic forms. It means that while we talk with our fellow beings, we hardly notice that which feature we are taking from what languages. But it comes automatically, it comes from our linguistic repertoire naturally, and we use them, we blend them, we fuse them very naturally while we talk to our fellow beings. People violate the rules of spatially imagined linguistic monocentricity. It means that every specific language, every discrete language, it has its own norm of use, but we violate this, bring about complexity, uncertainty, and unpredictability in the linguistic practices, which was hard to imagine previously, because our linguistic repertoire are now turned into tremendously complex, dynamic, unstable, unpredictable in polycentricity. It means that our linguistic repertoire consists of features from different linguistic sources. And while we use these sources to communicate with our fellow beings, we mix them up, we blend them, and we convey our ideas, our thoughts, or views. It often becomes very difficult to trace the origin of the linguistic items blended, how they have become part of the repertoire, and what kind of competence they represent. That means when we see someone talking and using different linguistic features in one go, we often feel that how he knows or how she knows so many languages. Actually, it is not a matter that she or he knows so many languages, but his or her linguistic repertoire possesses features from different languages. In the next 2 or 3 slides, we'll see some examples of using these features in our communication. Say these are some of the images where we see extreme Shakti bucket. In this phrase, we see that the first word is an English word, and the last word is also an English word, and in between we have a Bangla word. If we look at the third one, we see Shodor Daptor Uttor Poshchim region. The word region is an English word which has been blended with some Bangla words. If we go to the next slide, how the languages or linguistic features are blended in different contexts, we can have some ideas, like in school textbooks, one of the authors wrote, নারী পুরুষ সমতার অংশগ্রহণকে চ্যালেঞ্জ করে. So the word challenge is mixed or blended with some Bangla words. Similarly, in the next line, আজ হাফ ইয়ারলি পরীক্ষার অঙ্ক খাতা দিয়েছে, ফার্স্ট বেঞ্চে বসা কয়েকজন. So in the half yearly first bench, these English words have been blended with some Bangla words. In religious activities as well, we find blending or fusion of different languages or linguistic features. Like in the speech, the speaker mixes of or blends features from English, Bangla, Arabic, Farsi, and some other languages. In the next slide, yes, we see some other examples. Like in talk show, one of the speakers says, আমাদের ওই ওয়ার্ম আপ ম্যাচগুলা আমরা কি করব, মানে ম্যানেজমেন্টের তরফ থেকে. In these sentences, a number of words have been produced through blending English and Bangla. In a newspaper, we find that publisher পুলিশের দক্ষিণা, ব্যাংক কর্মকর্তাদের নেওয়া পার্সেন্টেজ, ভূমি অফিস রেজিস্ট্রি অফিসের বকরা, গরিবের রিলিফ, etc. In this sentence, we find a number of mixing between Bangla and English. Similarly, in literary text, one written by Humanities, he says, or he wrote, divorced মেয়ে, ভালো নামটা খুবই পুরনো টাইপ. So the word type, divorced, have been used in the literature, and they are the part of our academic curriculum. Another line by Kazi Nazrul Islam, Amma lal teri khun kiya khuniya. So in this sentence, we find a mixture of Urdu, Farsi, and Bangla words. The next sentence, in the next slide. So what is considered to be exceptional, aberrant, unusual, hybrid, impure, contaminated, or deviant in language and linguistic practices until the mid-90s is in fact perceived as normal now in super diversity. Whenever we found someone mixing of Bangla, English, Hindi together, some people call it Banglish or Bang English, whatever the terms they use, these are considered very derogative, and because they are considered contaminated language. But nowadays, with super diversity, these are now perceived to be normal. Thus, constant linguistic change and motion are the rule. Complexity and unpredictability are rife. It means that we are no more very proud of the unique use of a particular language. Rather, we are happy to blend different linguistic features together to convey our message, to share our feelings and views, and perform our communication. In the next slide, considering the contemporary, that means post-2000 development of sociolinguistic theories influenced by globalization and super diversity, how do we define language, or how do we perceive language? Is that It is a construct that is mobile, fluid, dynamic, complex, unbounded, and unpredictable. Because what we speak or what we say is unpredictable in the sense that we don't know what linguistic features from which languages we will use in our speech. Thus, linguistic practice is viewed as fluid. It's flexible, it's not fixed. It's dynamic, it's changeable, it's complex, it's creative, though hybrid. Even aberrant and deviant manifestation of linguistic resources in the self-talk, interaction, and discourse of any sort for any communication or communicative purposes in any any spatio-temporal, socio-cultural, and historical context is considered normal. That means what was thought to be abnormal, abusive in structuralism, in post-structuralism, particularly in globalization and super diversity, we consider them very usual. We appreciate them as normal. In the next slide, yes. So if we consider them normal, if we consider them real, if we consider them usual, then what are its theoretical and practical implications? It can play an important role in language policy making, say in case of medium of instruction policy, official language policy, language acquisition policy, and language management. We can find a number of references where we see that though monolingualism or use of one language is the norm, but people are found to be or found to practice actually hybridism or the blending of features from different linguistic resources or sources. For example, we in 2001 finds that both the teachers and the students are found to use plenty of English as well as code switch creatively, critically, and strategically between English and Chinese frequently and regularly in and out of the classrooms of the Chinese complementary schools for heritage language teaching in Britain, where one language only or one language at a time is the policy in practice. That means, though it is the policy of the school that one language only or one language at a time, but both the students and teachers are found to practice code switching, switching between English and Chinese frequently in and out of the classrooms. That means they're violating the norms of one language. In the next example, by cross-critique, it is found that Arizona Tiva people hybridize their indigenous Tiva language with non-ethnic Hopi English, despite their claim of being ethno-linguistic conservatives. They're very conservatives. They cannot tolerate any mixing of their Tiva language, and it is considered one of the sacred languages. And they consider it, if someone mix up Tiva features with Hopi and English, it is a kind of offense and punishable offense. But in practice, we find that almost all of them or many of them practice blending, practice hybridism with their ethnic language Tiba and Hopi and English. Martinez et al. Also find that both the teachers and students in Southern California in a Spanish-English dual language program, which emphasizes a policy of language separation. That means one language at a time. But the teachers and students are found to practice translanguaging, a mixture of different languages. So what can we think of translanguaging practices in Bangladesh with regard to official language policy. I was listening to Dr. Bijoy, and I found that he was talking about the curriculum reformation and how we can use it in our classroom, or what languages can we use to teach languages or teach English to our students. So if hybridism or translanguaging is a practice in globalization and super diversity, I think we need to consider these issues while making policies for languages, at least in language acquisition policies. What should be the medium of instruction in a classroom? As we all know that CLT allows us to use mother tongue with the target language. If that is the case, in what ways can we use both mother tongue and the target language English? As far as our official language policy is concerned, it is said that we should use only Bangla, and fusion of other languages, especially English, is strictly prohibited. But if we consider the present scenario, the impact of globalization and super diversity, we need to think about our language policy. If we want to see that we become part of globalization, we go with globalization, then we need to admit the global impact on language, the impact of super diversity on language, and accordingly we need to think about redefining our language policy. With this, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mostafizar Rahman. It was really thought-provoking, and I was listening to your lecture, I mean, with all interest. Now I would like to open the session for question and answer. Anyone, if you want to participate or if you want to make any comment, you can.
So
May I ask something to Bijoy?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Bijoy, the topic that you presented, I loved it. You tried to present two views from urban and rural. There is an urban and rural dichotomy in appreciating the curriculum and textbook. In most of the comments, we found that while rural teachers and rural stakeholders find the materials interesting, the urban areas, the schools, or the teachers or the students in the urban schools, they find it some sort of demotivating. What is your suggestion to resolve this dichotomy?
Right. Thank you for this question. Actually, it might appear that I'm making a dichotomy, but that was not my intention. I observed teachers and interviewed teachers in a number of schools, some of them from urban, some from rural, some from suburban schools. And the picture is not uniform. It's not possible, and it would not be right if we try to create a dichotomy, like urban schools are like this, rural schools are like this, because there will be variations. Two urban schools will be very different, two rural schools will be very different, and two classes in the same school with two different teachers might look very different. So I'm not trying to make a dichotomy, but it's a coincidence that some of the quotes came from the urban school, where the textbook was not perceived as a good fit for the students. And in the rural schools, some teachers pointed out that these books are good, because the writers are all experts. They know very well what they want out of the textbooks. They are qualified to write the textbooks, but it is our bad luck that we teach here, and our students do not have the required proficiency level to understand the textbooks. Like, for example, the book for class 6, this book is good, but my students cannot write the alphabet. If you give them the alphabet, they cannot read from A to Z properly. Only 5% of the students, something like that, this is what they said, 5% of the students can read the alphabet or read the textbook. So they cannot really understand it. So we have to simplify it. We have to leave out literary text. We choose only a few texts, explain the text to them so that they can pass the exam. So apparently, there is a rural urban divide, but it's complex. So I wouldn't say that it would be possible to generalize across along that line. But for for a lot of schools, I think it is true. For a lot of students, it is true that the top schools in Dhaka, um, teachers teaching there and students studying there feel that they need supplementary materials. The books are not that interesting. But then I didn't conduct a survey, so I wouldn't generalize. So coming back to your question, what can be done? I think I've explained that instead of a one size fits all policy, we can go for horses for courses approach, where we have a number of where we allow our schools to choose textbooks. So we produce textbooks, but we also explain to the schools and to the teachers that you can supplement the materials. These textbooks are to help you, to aid the teaching learning process, but feel free to supplement the books as required. So if this is stated explicitly by the policymakers, teachers will not feel constrained, and they will feel free to choose the materials they want. And a lot of teachers are capable of developing materials. So we don't want teachers to become curriculum implementer. We want them to be curriculum makers, curriculum developers, not just implementers. But the teachers have been reduced to let's say curriculum implementers, the role of curriculum implementers. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bijoy. Thank you very much.
Exactly, and yeah, I agree with Dr. Vijay sir that we should allow teachers and students to choose to select their own text. It actually helps to motivate learners at times, so that if they can bring in, I mean, and teachers, they are aware that what can motivate their students, right? So we should give them the freedom of selecting text. And several studies, I mean, we have conducted several studies on the topic, and that's the same finding actually came up. All right, Professor Shamsur, sir, wanted to ask something.
No, I was just listening to Bijoy, and both professors, they complement each other to some extent. So the movement from structuralism to post-structuralism, and the language policy to a great extent. But I'm just curious, this one size fits all, that has been the case, all along, right? So it's not only 2012 textbook, even before that, when we had English for Today, so we just had one textbook from the national textbook curriculum, especially when you have a standardized test at the end, you have SSC, HSC, so if you're preparing for your exam, so that has been the goal of a textbook, prepare for exams, and you have test papers and whatnot. But I'm not going to defend the book, because Bijoy has rightly pointed out from talking to different authors. I was commissioned to write, I think, 4 chapters So I would say commission, because I was not part of the policy framework. So I did not know, like, and I was given a sample chapter and I was told to, like, write on, say, the traffic issues, or like, so there were like 4 different aspects that were given for me to prepare the course materials. So I'm not very proud of it, but having said that, when you talk about the urban-rural divide, I think the way the activities were designed, so the difficulty level could have been, ascertained by the teachers, right? So, for example, the chapter on myth, so when you have a chapter on myth, so when you have, reference to Bangla myth, so the teacher had that freedom to choose their materials. And ideally, like, so it was supposed to be a creative exam system in which there was not supposed to be any guideline. And I think, like, so NCTB later on, I don't know, the funding issue, it just news to me. I did not know about any funding whatsoever.
Get paid. You get paid a
Right.
handsome salary for writing the
Well, I got 10,000 taka for my 4 chapters. So
okay.
I don't know whether it was handsome or not. Okay. So, but yeah, so the guidebook, so that was not, within our purview. So the entire purpose was, so students were supposed to be creative, but you're very right. The orientation of literature, like, using literature for language teaching, whether the teachers were really oriented or not, whether there were enough teachers trainings, whether this has been piloted or not. You rightly pointed out that, there was no piloting, right? So yes, maybe they have done needs analysis, but there was no piloting, like, in terms of, like, implementing the textbook. So that is a downside. But having said that, like, when you look at a book for, like, say, the edXL or GCSE, or, the California books that my daughter used, I've seen that the assignments are creative. Let's say, for example, you translate the text into a different media, right? So you write a blog on it, you write a personal essay on it, so you rewrite the conclusion of a story, all right? So you change a story into a play, or a play into a film script, so there are different ways of, like, getting engaged with the textbook. But it all boils down to the efficiency level of our students. So if the idea is that our students do not know the alphabet, and you're trying to, take that horse to the water and forcing them to drink it. So these horses for courses, I don't think, like, it will work out. And especially when an assessment system is there for, one size fits all. So, but I fully agree that a lot of brainstorming needs to be done, and we need to get help from the best practices abroad. There is no point in reinventing the wheel, so sometimes, like, we get carried away, like, thinking that we need to come up with a local solution. But then again, like, so all the pedagogical references that you're citing, so they come from the West, so that's the dichotomy again, like, so you're trying to, like, so you're trying to give a reference of Tiwa tribe and the Hopi tribe, and then try to replicate that model in a Bangladeshi context, so that is the problem. Like, so why can't we have an example from the Chakma issue, and like how the Chakmas are dealing with Bangla and English, and then, like, how does it influence our national textbook curriculum? So again, like, so I'm rambling, I know, and yeah. So, but thank you for your discourse, like, really exciting. So I'm curious to know about what other people have to say, right? Thank you. And you can respond, of course.
Yeah. Any other comments or
I
question?
just wanted to sort of offer a little, another view, sort of. So my daughter is preparing for her A-levels, and she used to go to one of the very well-known English medium schools, edXL curriculum. She's now doing her A-levels in the Cambridge curriculum. And one thing that she mentioned to me, which actually shocked me a little bit, because I assumed that she's fine, she doesn't need help with English and all that stuff. And she tells me that, when she looked at the questions, she was like, how do I answer these? you've been doing this all along, so it should not be a problem. And she says, well, in the school, they used to give us the questions and they would tell us the answers and tell us how to prepare those answers and everything. So it seems like even though, the assignments were creative, even though the textbook was creative, when it came to being taught by Bangladeshi teachers, even though it's an English medium school, the style of teaching or the methods seems to be replicated from what I'm hearing from the in the Bangla medium or in the rural or urban, whatever. It seems to be replicated there. So it seems like, even though she's going to this English medium school, and I've actually taken her out and she's doing it as a private candidate because they didn't offer the subjects that she is taking. But it seems like the training that she received was, again, by rote, and a lot of, input from the teachers rather than allowing the students to think creatively on their own. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, interesting.
Any comment on that? Yeah, any comment on that?
Interesting perspective. So yeah, a lot of people would assume that the top schools in Dhaka would have the let's say the state-of-the-art pedagogy where students would write on their own. They would develop their writing skill, thinking skill, and they would not be fed on a diet of fixed answers. But it's interesting that even in those top schools, some teachers might choose the shortcut and try to predict the answers and give their students ready-made answers. Uh, yeah, so I wouldn't make a rural urban divide as such. What I meant is that generally speaking, there are schools where teachers feel that they need more challenging, more interesting materials, and they seem to have access to that. And then, of course, so they feel constrained by the textbook. But at the same time, we also realize that teachers in certain contexts would not be capable of writing their own materials. So they are, let's say, given some help in the form of the textbook, so they don't have to spend time looking for materials. They have the textbook, it's ready, it's handy, so they can go into the classroom and teach. So a lot of teachers find it helpful to have a textbook. So I'm not against the textbook. What I'm saying is that we can explicitly state that teachers in certain schools can modify, adapt and supplement the materials if they feel that this is what they need. So in that case, they will have no guilty feeling. Like in case of medium of instruction as well, a lot of teachers I interviewed had guilty feeling for using Bangla. They confessed that they used Bangla because that is what the students needed. Otherwise students would not understand. And I asked them, why are you apologetic about it? Because they have got the impression that English should be used all the time. So the curriculum statement, the document, that should have clarity. The message should be clear there that English is the preferred language, all right, but there is no harm in using Bangla, so to facilitate understanding. So it is not always explicitly stated. So the reform message is not explicitly stated in the curriculum document. And about trialing actually happened, but there was no uptake of it. I mean, there was the feedback or the insight that you derive from trialing should be fed into the process of revising the material. But because there was no time, even though trialing happened, but there was no way to incorporate teachers and students' voices in revising the manuscripts. So it was there. If you talk to the high officials, they would show you, look, we have done the needs analysis, we have done the evaluation of the existing curriculum or previous curriculum, we have involved all stakeholders to look at that, we went through everything. But the problem is they haven't had enough time. They have spent too much time preparing the initial let's say the initial document or going through the first few stages, and the most important parts, preparing the textbooks, writing the textbooks, trialing the textbooks, and revising the textbooks. There was no time for that. So the system works in piecemeal fashion. It's not very systematic. The teachers' textbooks were produced, teachers' guides were not produced. So it's piecemeal. That is the problem with the system. So if we do not pay attention to the system, just changing the textbooks, changing the syllabus will not work. That was my main argument.
Yeah. And this time we have a, I mean, if you compare with previous textbooks, this time we have a better textbook because I have been investigating, I mean, these issues. Last time when I explored our previous textbook in 2015, 16, and 17, we saw there are several pitfalls. Now these are revised in the updated one, and several issues have been addressed. But the problem, as you said, still with the implementation in the classroom. Teachers, they are not well trained, and we have seen it. I mean, in several studies that we have conducted, teachers are not prepared still. And this is pity that even after 20 years, 25 years of implementation of CLT or the curriculum that we intended to implement, still they are not ready to implement it in the classrooms. So, so there are contextual issues as well, as you have pointed out rightly. All right. Any other question or comment?
So just a quick comment on the issue of teacher-led classroom. The other thing, when I do workshops on say National University for college teachers, and one of the recurrent feedbacks that we receive, teachers said, they rely on the coaching services, so they need to have that system so that students are forced to get into their coaching, right? So I'm not sure, maybe Bijoy, when you were there observing classes, so you are lucky to have a teacher-led lecture. I think in your absence, even that lecture would not exist. That is the reality. In most cases, so whatever teaching / learning happens, that happens outside of the classroom. So that's a sad reality. And what Arifa was saying about English medium school, yes, again, so most of our graduates, say from Dhaka University or Jahangir University, so they are teaching at the English medium schools, right? And they have their role model teachers, so they have been exposed to so-called best teachers, I would like to replicate, say, Professor Jilur Rahman Siddiqui, or whoever I've been exposed to, and my students would replicate that kind of teaching model. So even you get into a CLT structure, and then you have back of your mind, you have that teacher-centric orientation, which actually hampers your output, I suppose, or classroom performance. And it actually happens to me when I did my CELTA. So I actually did very bad in one of my micro teaching workshops because I was frustrated by their quote unquote ignorance, and I took over. I started lecturing, and and everybody is that's not how you teach. So yeah, again, old habits die hard.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. There is this phrase, observer's paradox. So when we go to a classroom to observe the lesson, teachers actually change the way they would otherwise teach. So you don't really get a true picture of a typical lesson. And so they try to teach in a way that they think they are expected to by the observer, um, and they try to incorporate certain activities, ask questions to the students. So if you are not there, you wonder, if you are not there, would they still ask those questions? Would they invite students to do some pair work? So yeah.
All right. Any other comment or question? If not, then I would like to ask one last question to Professor Mostafizar Rahman, which is on your last comment that you have made. You raised a question at the end of your lecture. Um, translanguaging, it's a complex issue still to implement in academia, especially pedagogical translanguaging. Now, the problem is um, when you talk about medium of instruction, I mean Bangla only policy, then there is also parallelly we see English only language policy as well. So how you will address this? So we need to come down to a point where we can encourage multilingualism, right? So would you like to address this? I mean, we have parallel medium of instruction.
Well, as far as medium of instruction policy is concerned in the schools, it is different from that of the medium of instruction policy in the tertiary level, particularly in the universities. Though in Bangladesh, most of the universities, they allow both Bangla and English in delivering lectures, but as far as testing or examinations are concerned, the questions are made mostly in English. But how about the medium of instruction issues in schools or secondary or higher secondary level? If we go back to the lectures delivered by Dr. Bijoy, he rightly pointed out that in CLT, mother tongue, or use of mother tongue is not prohibited, rather encouraged or permitted, we can say, to explain some difficult terms in the target language. That means that somehow we are actually accommodating both the languages, both the target language English as well as mother tongue Bangla, to be used parallel. Parallel in the sense that if any term is perceived to be difficult in the target language, the teacher can explain it in the mother tongue. That means the mother tongue is permitted or allowed in teaching the target language. So if that is the case, when in methodology, that means we are promoting CLT across the country in the secondary and higher secondary level, where use of mother tongue is permitted. On the other hand, we criticize the blended use of say Bangla and English. To my understanding, it is very much contradictory. So government can rethink of the policy for medium of instruction, even considering the reality that we cannot deny the impact of globalization. We can rethink of revising the policies for official language, because in most of the cases we find that notices are published in English, even though if in Bangla they use English terms in Bangla letters. So since we are if not appreciating the blended use of both Bangla and English, but we cannot deny the reality. So the policymakers can think of these issues of the impact of globalization and super diversity. Though Bangladesh is not that kind of super diverse as some other cities or other countries in the world, like say a city like London or Singapore, even say. But still, we are actually in the era of globalization. We are being influenced by it factors. So since with globalization and super diversity, our lifestyles have been reorganized, restructured. We see different languages here and there in our linguistic landscape. uh, we can think of revising our policies. Yes.
Dr. Bijoy sir has raised his hand. Yeah, sir.
Yeah, Mostafizar, I think, touched upon a very interesting issue of policy, how we can incorporate translanguaging in our policy. Now, I would like to share an experience. I have had the opportunity to work with academics and, let's say, administrators in a number of institutions over the years, and I know a few institutions where students are actually discouraged from using any Bangla on campus, and it is reiterated in meetings, in casual conversations, that English is the only language, uh, you know, on campus. Now, it is very
Yeah.
difficult to convince the university administrators that multilingualism is the reality. They know that, they hear, they see it all the time. You know, they are aware of the super diversity, language mixing, multilingualism, and translanguaging. But when it comes to policy, language policy, they are adamant about English only policy. They don't want to accommodate other languages. So, what is the real and what is desirable? I think there is a distinction between the two,
Yes.
and administrators and policymakers probably have a different idea when it comes to what is desirable. A few years ago, we saw this news report, and we heard our, chief justice, probably chief justice or
Mhm.
somebody from the justice system, saying that Bangla should be used in public places, language
Public
mixing should not
places.
happen. And then in private university, you have another picture where uh, you know
Exactly.
an
Exactly.
injunction is placed
Uh,
on the use of Bangla. So Rafi Saleh has been doing a lot of research. He's around. I don't know why
oh,
he's not.
he's here also.
Yeah,
Rafi
you'd
Bhai,
be
would you like to
he's the
add
right
something
person
here?
to talk about it. Mustafi sir, what do you think?
Yes.
If you are in formulating the policy, would you incorporate translanguaging in teaching?
Actually, if we see or observe the classroom teaching situations or practices, don't we use translinguaging in the classroom while we deliver lectures or while we invite questions from the students? Even while we address to the students' questions, we actually practice translinguaging in our classroom teaching learning situations. But whether it should be included in the policy document or not, that is altogether a different issue. But but
All right.
but the thing is that we in reality actually practice translinguaging, and it is not new in any language. It has been since the origin of Bangla language. Translinguaging is there. It has, if we look back to the history of the growth and development of Bangla language, we find that a number of languages have contributed to the development of Bangla from its origin, from the so-called Prakrit to the current situation. We find that Bangla language was influenced or has been influenced by other languages throughout its development. So if language if a language like Bangla has been developed through hybridization, through mixing, through blending, and translanguaging or hybridism is practiced in reality, then I don't see any point to be to include translinguaging in our policy. It's my personal point of view.
I think with that we can we actually reach to
Yeah.
the end of this session. We have to wrap it up. It's almost 9:30, 35 in fact. So I would like to request our honorable head of the department, Associate Professor Arifagani Rahman, to convey her vote of thanks. Ma'am.
Thank you so much, Moshoor. Thank you. That was a really edifying discussion that was going on, and I think that it could have gone on for much longer. But given that it's a Ramzan night, and I know that a lot of people are here, having done their iftar and rushing to join this conversation. So I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so very much, Professor Mostafizar Rahman and Dr. Vijaylal Boshu, for making the time and being here and having this wonderful discussion that's really enlightening and I think very necessary at this point in time. I look forward to having you back at ULAB for more discussions in the future, in the near future. Thank you so much, Moshoor, for putting this together and bringing everybody onto this platform and offering us this opportunity to listen to such interesting debates and discussions. And I would like to also thank our Pro-Vice Chancellor, Professor Shamsud Murtaza, for making the time to be here and for joining in the conversation. Always has very interesting insights to offer. I would like to also thank our admin officers, Leah Bishash and Titi Dash, for putting helping to put the program together. My thanks to our IT team, Kaiser Bhai, for being here, sticking around for so long. Thank you, Kaiser Bhai, for doing all the back-end work. And of course, my thanks to our colleagues and our students who are here to be a part of this discussion. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mustafiz, Bijoy, thank you so much.